Happy New Year and welcome to a watch list. I haven't done one in a while. You probably noticed, you may not have. I hate listening to people talk about, reasons why or otherwise. Suffice to say, when life gets busy, I prioritise watching films rather than making films. But I'm here to talk about some releases that I'm looking to recommend to you, that I've watched over the past while. I think you'll get something out of, and because I haven't made one in such a long time and I have watched a lot of movies, I've tried to pick films that actually aren't going to make my top end of the year list, which will be coming in a few days or so once I get through with it. I think Indicator have had a really banner year. They have had some great box sets, a couple of Columbia Noir sets, a Hammer set, and obviously the Mae West set that came out recently. But I think it's their individual releases this year that I've enjoyed the most out of everything that they've done, and none more so than Day of the Dolphin. Although, as I say, it doesn't make my year-end list. I think this is terrific. George C. Scott stars as a scientist who looks after a dolphin research project in which he's trying to make inroads into communicating with the dolphin population, all while having some in captivity. It's kind of one of those scientific constructs that you think, God, if they're really scientists and really love the dolphins, they wouldn't have them in captivity like this, although they are well looked after, etc. And, people get wind of this project and want to see, the results of it, both those that are funding it and those that are finding something out about it, because what he's finding is that it can communicate maybe more directly than what you think with the dolphins. And because this is the idea, and because dolphins predominantly are seen as a smart animal and somebody that people can communicate and reason with, people have maybe more nefarious ideas of how to use this newfound intelligence or otherwise, or way to communicate with the dolphins. It's typical Indicator fare in that you can see why it's not like a mainstream on every Sunday or Saturday afternoon on TV. It's kind of a bit left of centre, and it has some great performances in it as usual, but it has at the core of it a pretty interesting premise, even if it's a bit fantastical and a bit silly. And it certainly goes even further that way through the course of the film. It's something that's definitely worth watching. And as usual, it has full of great extras. There's a selected scene commentary. There's also a documentary of about 44 minutes. Yes, indeed, 44 minutes, detailing how troubled the production was of it, and then in-depth discussion of the film. And I think, again, in typical Indicator style, these kind of interviews and extras that go along with it are well worth diving into, because these are meaty films with broad themes that are maybe a bit more than just the surface level plot, and deserve to be delved well into. And a film and a set of releases that I really enjoyed this year. Next up, well, Eureka have had an interesting year, I think. I think their Masters of Cinema line has been very up and down. They've found a lot of the old love for silent cinema throughout the year. But I think the Eureka Classics range, aside from the odd left turn here and there into, slightly off horror stuff or cult horror, they've mainly been concentrating on kung fu movies, and I've talked about a lot of them. I've talked about the modern kung fu movies with Ringo Lam and Choi Hark, and there's going to be one of those makes my year-end list. And aside from that, they've been doing some previous years Jackie Chan, but this year seems to be a lot more Sammo Hung. And again, I've talked about those a lot this year, but I'm going to talk about Millionaires Express. And this was a much vaunted film, so I was interested to see, as I always am, why this is so well thought of, why people like to talk about Millionaires Express. And the thing that comes about Millionaires Express for me is that it feels a lot more modern than even Encounters of Spooky Kind. It's been made in 1986, so a few years after that, but it feels actually the production quality, or the transfer anyway, it gives it the appearance that it seemed to be made a few years after that. We have Sammo Hung's character that is a bit of a bad boy out of town, and comes back to try and do something good for the town, and that is, hijack a train so that people come to his old town and spend all their money while they're waiting. So it's a train full of rich people, hence the Millionaires Express, and he wants to get them to come back. Aside from all this, there's maybe some characters in the establishment in the town that maybe aren't as true to form as they maybe should be. The old sheriff, and they want to make their own money in their own way that they can, and all these things kind of come to head in what is a typical kung fu farce. And there's no doubt about it, the farce of the nature of this film is very much to the fore. It's very stupid, but the set pieces, of which they are in regular intervals throughout the production, are excellent. I think they're really inventive. I think, especially given this is 1986, and there's obviously a long legacy of these types of films and these types of setups, I think they've done a great job of reinventing the genre and actually making it really fun and engaging the whole way through. I think it's one of the best releases that have been put out in this range this year. Really good fun, and again, you get 2 discs. One with different cuts of the film. There's multiple cuts of the film, which I have to say, as the years went on, especially in these kung fu movies, I've gained a lot of respect for actually the differences that go into these cuts. I'll speak about this more in my year-end list. There's a film in there that talks very clearly about that. But we have, some interviews with Cynthia Rothrock, who was on the cast, and as usual, you have your Frank Jang audio commentary. And then a select scene audio commentary as well, with Cynthia Rothrock as well. So really enjoyed Millionaires Express. I think it looks fantastic, and well worth checking out. Next one's a bit of a weird one. This one's from Australia, and I know I still haven't finished my French cinema season. I've got the next part coming out soon. Trust me. I am planning about what to do after that, and when I think about regions that deserve a bit more exploration or a bit more bringing to the fore, one of the regions that really jumps to mind is Australia, and especially, even New Zealand. I think Arrow especially have done a really good job of bringing Australian cinema to the fore. Hounds of Love, the Roger Donaldson movies like Sleeping Dogs, Smash Palace, and then the Quiet Earth, etc. All great movies, and that kind of desperate status that Australia films seem to give off, because there seems to be so much free land there, they always seem to be able to capture the region and the mood very well in that place. And this one is, this is only a DVD copy, but this is a print that I enjoyed very much, but I enjoyed it so much I've actually bought the Blu-ray because it's part of a line. And it is Peter Weir, who, quite a famous filmmaker, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Master and Commander, etc. But it's his film The Last Wave, starring Richard Chamberlain here, and it also has David, and I'm gonna butcher this, Gulpilil, the Aborigine actor who came to fame in Walkabout, which I'll probably talk about in a subsequent watch list. But Last Wave is a film of 2 halves. I think Peter Weir shows, 1977 I think the film is, shows real chops as a filmmaker, as a burgeoning filmmaker, certainly, where we have a setup of a man who leaves the bar and is promptly found up murdered, but he's a man of Aboriginal origin, and there are 3 or 4 other Aboriginal men that are arrested in connection with this murder, and in the background we have basically this setup of modern culture looking for a crime, looking how motive, looking for method of killing, and then you have the tribal and Aboriginal experience of their culture and actually how the reasons that people are ostracised from that community and how they're dealt with, and the ways in which people can die. So there's definitely mysticism that goes along with the cultural element of it. Aside from this, there is a man played by Richard Chamberlain who's a lawyer who's been tasked with defending these men, and he comes to the same conclusion: is this a cultural thing or is this a modern society thing? And that setup, I think, is very strong. I think there's really good interplay and good mystery that comes from what has happened to this man, and ultimately whether it matters or whether the Aboriginal society, even though they're modern society, should be able to keep their own culture. And then it digresses in the last bit into a bit of a fever dream. It's a bit of a reminiscent of like a drugs film in some ways, in that people find the meaning of life and all of that kind of stuff that goes in the end. Without spoiling too much, I think the last half an hour can make it feel a little bit obtuse, and doesn't maybe tie together the early themes together as well as maybe you thought from the outset, especially given with how carefully crafted the opening is, and how beautifully made that is. You know, they've got a man who's a lawyer who's very much concerned with his own family, but also concerned about his place within society and what good he can do for people. And then you have obviously the Aboriginal people that are very much, you know, part of modern society, but trying to find a place where their own identity and culture can sit within that, and what it means for them as people. The Last Wave, I think, is a terrific film. I think it's really interesting. I think it's very unusual in terms of films that I've seen this year, and yeah, definitely one I'll be looking to revisit when the Blu-ray arrives. It's part of the Sunbird Screams release slate from Umbrella, who have just raised in their awareness for me over the course of the year as the types of films that have been coming out. And while this release doesn't have any extras, I mean, I could pass this on once the other one arrives, because I think it's a pretty good DVD print. And when you upscale these good DVD prints, they look just as good as most Blu-ray releases. But a good and interesting release there. Next up is a BFI release, and you know, BFI were very lauded by myself last year. I think a lot of their output this year has been excellent. Without maybe, it's not going to hit the highs that it did last year with some of those releases that I just bowled me over. But this one was a very substantial and big release for them, and that is One of Our Aircraft is Missing. And it's a Paul and Pressburger film, a black and white one. You know, Paul and Pressburger, famous for The Red Shoes, The Tales of Hoffman, Life of Colonel Blimp, Black Narcissus, etc. And you know, a lot of those films are very much celebrations of Technicolor and beautiful representations of colour and screen that not only stood up at the time, but stand up to the modern day. And this is a monochrome film, and I did have to did a double take when I looked at the year, because it's 1942, and it tells the story of some British airmen in the RAF who crash and land in Holland, and how they try and make it and escape back home, given that Holland is in the raptures of Nazi occupation at the time. And it's about the Dutch resistance basically helping them along the way as they get to the far end. And given that this happened in 1942, which is smack bang in the middle of the war, it makes it all the more surprising and all the more relevant that it manages to keep, I think, a pretty upbeat tone the whole way through it. There's a comedic element that runs through it. There is a warm sense of family and camaraderie. There are obviously those scenes where you really fear for the characters, that there's really grave danger to them, and they're done really, really well. I mean, one of those ones you pull the covers up to your face, just hoping and wishing that maybe they're all going to get alive. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And a really, really terrific film, and one that sits right alongside, I think, a lot of those other releases that I've talked about with Paul and Pressburger, given that it's very different in theme from what they are. And the release itself is very interesting. I mean, mostly what you get are some short films with it, and you get a rather substantial booklet. Now I'll show you the booklet to start off with, because I've managed to crease a corner. That's the problem with these booklets being slightly smaller than the new cases that they put out. We have a couple of essays inside, and I think the BFI essays are as good as anybody's, to be perfectly honest. They always go for broad themes and looking at different aspects of the release itself. There's a lot of short films, and that makes sense given the content. I think something the BFI do very well is put those put the short films that match the themes of the release, and then on top of that, in this release, and I think this is still in the new release that's available, is this little booklet. Now I'm going to try and show you it. It's got the 6D thing at the side, but it's a mixture of photographs and writings that are almost in the style of a newspaper at the time, you know, of the real life events that happen around it. So scenes from the movie, etc., and that goes along with it. And you know, it's like a dramatization of the thing itself. So like the written story, and telling you about the characters that were involved, the people that really helped them out at the time and the people that are heroes. And I think the film really pays homage to those people that are in there. And I think this is a really lovely release, and one that I bet you is going to come down for a sale price in the new year. And I think definitely one that I would encourage people to pick up and go for, because I think One of the Aircraft is Missing is a tremendous film, and one that should be talked about. Maybe not. I think The Red Shoes, etc., are in the pantheon of the greatest films ever made. But when you talk about great films ever made by great directors, of which there are a lot of people, we could maybe do a whole couple of episodes and series on that alone. I think One of Our Aircraft is Missing is right up there. And last this week is a Criterion release, and Criterion, well, I think Criterion have had an amazing year. I think somebody had said that they didn't think their output this year matched previous years. I just think I had more film discoveries through Criterion than I did anybody else, even Indicator this year, of films that I thought were incredible. And a filmmaker that I'd only seen a film here and there about, I've managed to see quite a lot, not just through Criterion but actually through BFI this year. I've had a lot of releases, and that is Mike Leigh. And I never really understood the Mike Leigh phenomenon of filmmaking, and this one is Secrets and Lies, with Brenda Blethyn, Marianne Jean-Baptiste, Timothy Spall's in it. I mean, the performances in this film are other level good. I think it tells the story of a young lady, Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who wants to find her parents. She's adopted, and she wants to find out who her parents are. And unlikely as it seems, her parent or mother is white, as it turns out, and it creates this lovely contrast of what your expectations are as a person at the start of the movie and what the reality is. As Marianne Jean-Baptiste is very well to do, Brenda Blethyn's character is very unsure, suffers from terrible mental health, but it's about these two meeting of minds and what they have in common. And this work, playing with expectations, is exactly what Mike Leigh wanted, given that you may or may not know, but his films, he tends to not tell his stories, his characters, the full story. They discover it in the scenes as much as anything else. They improvise a lot of the scenes, and there are some scenes here in particular where you can see how that plays out as people, are standing, waiting, not knowing who's going to meet them in the scene, and how that's used the incredible effect as it is in this film. I think Secrets and Lies is absolutely brilliant. It was a real discovery for me this year. It kind of sat well with an awful lot of other Mike Leigh films that I've watched this year that I've equally enjoyed. I think he's a really interesting and dynamic filmmaker, and one that you can always turn up and see something interesting in all of his movies. We have a set of extras here. We have an interview with Leigh himself. We have a great interview with Marianne Jean-Baptiste, and we have an interview with the composer of the film as well. I think it's a really great release. It just missed my top list, mainly because there were so many other Criterion releases this year that just grabbed me that little bit more, that resonated with me a bit more, but were no equally as great as Secrets and Lies. I think special mention should go to Timothy Spall. I know he's been in a lot of Mike Leigh films, but I think his performance in here is really goes to show what a great actor Timothy Spall is. I think it's somebody that's become caricatured the longer he's went on to his career as being a certain type, but he is really real gravitas, and he's the centre of this film. He holds this family together, and his character holds the whole film together as being the voice of reason and through it. And I think as a performance, it should be celebrated an awful lot more, in terms of performances that nobody really talks about, because obviously Brenda Blethyn's performance is, the star of the show, so to speak here. But I think without the contrast of Timothy Spall's character and some of the other performances here, I don't think would be as effective and wouldn't sit quite as well. And it just goes to show what great film making there is. And that is my watch list for this week. I hope it's been worth waiting on. Probably not, let's be honest, but I hope you got a couple of recommendations there of things that maybe you're sitting in wrappers on your shelf that maybe you haven't picked up yet, or that maybe are coming up in sales in the next few weeks. I hope you're keeping well. I hope you and your family are keeping well, and I hope 2022 lives up to the promise of being better than last year. which for many of us was a bit of a struggle. I'll speak to you soon.